Hello everyone and welcome to A Fictional Escapist. Today's video is a book review of Silkfire by Zabay Elor, which I received via a Netgalley EARC in the month of February. I will preface this by saying I did not enjoy this book. If you don't like negative reviews, I'm going to try and be critical rather than negative, but this may not be the one for you. I had a lot of issues with it, and what I'm hoping to do is sort of go through an overview of a very convoluted plot, and which will be spoiler-free, have some spoiler-free filled thoughts, and then sort of go into specifics, which will be spoiler-filled. I'll pop down timestamps down below for those of you who do not want to hear any spoiler-filled thoughts and you want to make that decision for yourself. So jumping into Silkfire. At the heart of this story, I would call it a politically fueled family drama. We have our main protagonist, Corey. She's a bright star who is a courtesan turned politician who wants to basically overthrow his father, who has come into a potential political power, and that would be bad because his father's not a very nice person. In amongst all of this, we have a smattering of fantastical beings and storylines sort of sprinkled throughout, and then they try to become parts of the storyline, but it gets very messy and convoluted is probably a word you're going to hear a lot within this review. Each name in the book has like a full name and then a shortened version. Sometimes there's a nickname or a title with it, which adds a little bit to the confusion of the book. But going forward, I'll refer to our main protagonist, Corey Shiza, as Corey. So Corey basically uses his particular talents to sleep his way to the top and get into all of the political parties, gather intel, pick sides, and fall in love along the way. I should have said at the beginning this is a fantasy romance, so there are elements of both of those things within the book. The courtesans in this book are basically looked down upon by other entities, but they're also expected to be in high-stake events, political parties and whatnot, allowing them to be in places where the information that could be gathered about certain people are gathered. Was that English? I'm not sure. During a particular party at the very beginning of this book, Corey has been hired as a courtesan by a certain member of a family which he's had encounters with before, and they sneak away and there is a climax, and during that climax Corey becomes a very powerful being. Without getting too much into what happens in the story, Corey now has to hide that he is this powerful being, and this being that he becomes can sway the political parties either way. So basically you've got two separate storylines very early on which overlap and can confuse the reader. It certainly confused me. So we're dealing with this convoluted family drama. We're also having to see a young, moody man deal with a new power that they're not really sure how to deal with, and then just a smorgasbord of trust issues from the past and current relationships. That's essentially it. There's a lot in this plot, and I can't really go more into detail for you without getting into some major spoilers. So sort of going to stop talking about the plot. We've got a political family thing. Son wants to overthrow dad. Getting into what I thought about the story. I want to warn people going into this book, if you are watching this review before picking it up, I believe this book comes out in May. There's a lot of sex going into it. Now, I know that our protagonist's profession is a courtesan or a high-end escort, so I did expect a little bit of that going into this book, but there's a lot, and I mean, damn man, that many times a day is just plain unrealistic. But just that being said, some of it's graphic, some of it's not. A lot of it's I found quite tame in terms of graphics, but if you're uncomfortable with that kind of content, this may not be a book for you. Another thing I will say going in, particularly for queer people or people who identify within the LGBTQIA+ acronym, going into this book, just be warned there's a lot of representation of everyone under that umbrella, but none of it, in my opinion, is done particularly well or does it justice. As someone who's lived as a lot of parts of that acronym throughout their lifetimes, I found some of it damn right offensive, because while they're trying to stuff inclusivity and diversity into this book, which is great, we need more inclusivity and we need more diversity in our books, it tried to put in too much, too fast, with no sort of development, no sort of character arcs, and no depth to these characters, which sort of felt like band-aid fixes to a much bigger problem. For example, we have the bisexual slut trope in there. I'm bisexual, I know a lot of bisexuals. We don't have to sleep with everyone, but it is such an easy trope to play into it because you're attracted to multiple genders. Therefore, you want to sleep with everyone. Be more creative with your bisexuals, please. I've read good bisexuality. Anyway, sorry, that's a rant. We do have male-male relationships, we've got female-female relationships which are depicted. We have a transgender aunt, and that was a bit of a gripe for me in particular because it was sort of mentioned that this woman was transgender, and then halfway through the book it got mentioned again. It was a little bit derogatory, and personally I didn't like it. It irked me, but maybe that's because of my own experiences. We do also experience a polyamorous relationship which just felt forced. Again, reading is subjective. Those are all my opinions. Read it for yourself if you want to, and make your own. In terms of the plot, or in terms of the actual story, I should say, I believe this suffered from two main faults. The first being an overcomplication. This started from the very beginning. At the beginning of the book, we are given a glossary and a pronunciation of names. So there's a list at the beginning where you're giving everybody's full name, their title, if they're referred to as another title at some point during the book, and their nickname, and then those interchange within the book. Now you've got 420 pages, so you'd be maybe 2 or 3 if you're doing a multi-POV book, if you're talking about a few different characters, but these names were overly complicated and there were so many of them, and some of them were similar that it was hard to keep track of. Now, as a plot-driven reader, more so than a character-driven reader, I don't mind having to piece together some stuff for myself. I don't mind having to put 2 and 2 together. But when you have multiple plot lines which are crossing over with very little leeway and very little give, and the reader has to try and distinguish what these plots are doing, it just becomes very messy. And that's what happened here. I feel like at parts of this book, the author has word vomited all of their thoughts about the different plots onto the page and forgotten to go back and edit them. There can be sentences between sentences that make no sense when they're put together, but had they been separate paragraphs, might have made this book flow a little bit more. The second thing that this book suffered from was inconsistency. So decisions would be made by our main character or other characters within the book, and then 30 seconds later, those decisions would change. Or in one chapter, it would be something, and then 3 chapters later, it would be something else. But it wasn't done in a way that was a character arc or a story arc. It just felt like we've gone, no, I didn't like that idea. Now I'm going to change it into this idea. And I'm not really sure how to connect the two, so we're just going to go with it. And that was, it made the book feel very disjointed, it made it feel jumpy and not enjoyable for me as a reader. Now, just before we jump into spoilers, I do want to say this book was not all bad. There were interludes within the book, so every few chapters you would get an interlude, which did really well at explaining Corey's backstory and sort of explaining to the reader why he acted the way that he did and how decisions that he came about, essentially. Now, I'm a sucker for a backstory. I love when we get to deep dive into someone's past and learn about why and how they tick. So that did work for me. Unfortunately, those chapters were few and far between in a much bigger story. The other thing that I want to say is the premise of this book was quite cool, particularly if you like a good political fantasy with a couple of dragons and some necromancers and other things thrown in there. So it sounded very cool, but in my opinion it was too much, too fast. Had one or two of these elements been pulled back, taken out of this book and maybe introduced in a second book to further the story, this would have been a much better read. Alright team, for those of you who want to tap out of spoilers, here is your chance. We're going to some spoiler chats in 3, 2, 1, let's go. I want to go back into inconsistency for a second. Now, an example of this is Corey becomes the dragon, basically this powerful being which I mentioned earlier on in the video. Whoever has power over the dragon, or whoever the dragon sides with, would essentially be unbeatable for whoever controlled him, whatever side controlled him. Now, this is the big secret that he has to keep. It does happen pretty early in the book, so don't worry, not too much has been given away. When Corey is asked what makes him transform, and there is a bit of development of being very confused, transforming, having things happen without him really realizing and having to put two and two together for himself. But when he's asked, and when it's been established, what makes him change, what makes him shift, he says, happiness, being happy. And then we see that with the bisexual throuple that happens, and when he's happy with these people, he will start to shift. But that changes. We then see him shift in anger, we see him shift in fear, we see him shift when he's threatened, which is basically those two things, and it's inconsistent. There's no character arc or no explanation as to why that's happening. There's no development as to his powers growing. It just sort of happens, and we're not given that explanation to be like, well, I guess as he becomes a dragon and as he continues to learn about his powers, he's able to manipulate when he shifts. It's just not answered. It's an unanswered question, which was very frustrating as a reader. The other thing that I want to point out, which really irked me, was the shallowness of the relationships, the romantic relationships in this book. I'm not a romance reader. I don't know if this is a thing, but basically we have this throuple that happens. Now, Corey's been burnt in the past, which we get to understand, and he has some trust issues, and given his profession, he's also been abused, and there are some definite trust issues when it comes to love and sex, and those things can get convoluted in his mind because he's a courtesan. He does it as work, so he doesn't know when people are taking him for a ride, essentially. But he makes terrible decisions when it comes to his romantic relationships. The bisexual throuple that we get feels so damn forced, and I kind of touched upon it a little bit. So we have Corey, we have a woman, and we have a gentleman that he's interested in. Now, an example of this is basically we see Corey have feelings for a woman, and generally he is attracted to men. So he's confused about his feelings for this woman in the book, and he goes, oh, I'm feeling different ways about you. I've not felt this way before. I want to trust you, but I'm having some issues. And eventually he goes, you know what? I want to be with you. So they are together. And he goes, okay, well, I want to try this. I want to try this relationship with you. There's no mention of anybody else except she's okay with what he does for a living. In the next sentence, I don't even know if it was a chapter break or a paragraph, he walks into another room and sees the gentleman love interest, and there's definitely some sexual tension there, and all of a sudden, gentleman love interest kisses him, and Corey's like, oh, yeah, okay, into this, and kisses him back with no second thought for old love over in the other room. And then she walks in and she's all like, oh, Mr. Man, you made a move, good for you. And Corey sort of turns around like a stunned mullet, and he's like, huh? Are you okay with this? And she's like, yeah, no worries. I was planning that all along. I can't believe you guys waited so long to smooch on each other a little bit. And it just felt weird, and yeah, forced is the best word I can come up with for it. It irked me. The relationship between those three characters really irked me a lot. The other thing that happens is one of this throuple betrays Corey over and over and over and over again, and he keeps going back. And as a reader, that's very frustrating, because in 1 second he would be like, oh, he betrayed me, not gonna be doing that again. Oh, he's really hot, so he knows how to fight with a thing. So I guess. Oh, he betrayed me again. Damn it, I didn't see that coming. And it happens like 5 or 6 times in the book, and it's just... I twitch. Anyway, another cool thing I will say about this is the magic is based in like energy and essence, and you can breathe your essence into someone, which is kind of cool. And you've got dull people who don't have essence, and you've got people who have a lot of essence, and Corey is one of the people that have a lot of essence. As a sidebar, I didn't mention that at the beginning, the magic system is kind of cool. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Silkfire by Zabay Allure. I will be completely honest and say, had this not been a Netgalley arc, which I felt obligated to finish and then put feedback on the website, I probably would have DNF'd this book, and I don't know if I'll pick up the second one. In fact, I'm pretty sure I will not, because I didn't like this one. I would like to think the author has learnt and, developed, but I just don't know if this author is going to be for me. If you like the content, give it one of these, and if you want to see more of it, then you can click subscribe if you want to, and I will catch you in the next video. Ciao.